Yeah, I mean, there's no write-up portion of it because you're doing it yourself, but yeah, otherwise it's basically the same idea. And I think, yeah, you can even use some of the same books that you're using for the the other class assignment.
Some point tonight I gotta order this fossil book.
I have a copy in my office. One thing is be careful with it because it's an old copy. It's a little fragile and some of the pages are falling out.
I don't feel good about that.
Okay.
If something happens to it, it's on me. If something happens to the library thing, that's another thing.
Fair enough, but yeah, like if you find that it's going to take a long time to get to or whatever, just let me know and I will. You can certainly it's not like I can't replace it. It's an old copy that I didn't pay for, so. I think I got my uncle was cleaning out a bunch of his books like 20 years ago. I was like, here, take this. Okay. All right. So then let's just go ahead and jump back in here. So what do you want to talk about? What did you what really struck you about today's reading?
One thing I didn't notice, and it's been like forever since I've seen the film, but one thing I did notice is that Balin succeeded Thorin, went to Moria.
Yep.
And yeah, he's out of the saga.
Yeah, and yes, Balin is out of the saga. Yes, until he's not. But I think I've been reading reading a couple articles on how this particular chunk of the Fellowship of the Ring is often one of the hardest parts of the trilogy for people to get to, especially the first two chapters of this, because so much of it is exposition and people meeting each other and finding out what's happening in other parts of the world, right? It's actually a really important part of the book, and Balin and what Balin is doing is a part of that. But I think it might help if we kind of trace the narrative pattern that we've been looking at through the whole text so far. So we start with book one. Right, we have a pattern that's not unlike what we had in The Hobbit, right? Where we go from place of safety to place of danger to place of safety. So book one, we went from the Shire to the Old Forest, to Bombadil's house, to the Barrow Downs, to Bree, to Weathertop, to finally Rivendell. And it looks, at least at the beginning of what we've got here, with the portion we've read for today, that we're going to be following a similar pattern in book two. Right? We're starting at Rivendell. Our first two chapters are at Rivendell. And we go from Rivendell into the wilderness. And this actually, I think, does get a little bit more complicated because we first have that attempt to get past the mountain, Carapras, and when that fails, they go through Moria. So this portion of the book is bookended by Rivendell and Moria as the major locations. So, what did you think about Rivendell? What do you make of this place? Notice anything particular about it, or?
There's a lot of merrymaking. There's a lot of it's pretty static to how it was back with Bilbo.
Yeah, it's there's a lot more detail invested in it here, right? And I think that there are particular reasons why it gets sort of more developed here, right? In The Hobbit, it is just one of those places of rest, right? And I remember Tolkien basically dismisses it in a sentence, right? It's feasting and cheer and good times are better to experience, but not much fun to read, right? And then he gives us two very long chapters, two of the longest chapters in the book, that are now just devoted to Rivendell and who lives there and what people do there. And I think I want to go particularly to, well, let's first look at what we note about Frodo when he wakes up. What is Frodo unable to account for when he first wakes up?
Whatever happened after he passed out.
Yeah. He's actually been out for several days, right? So yeah, he doesn't really know what day it is or what time it is. If we look, it's page 215 in my edition. I think it's probably not in yours.
Probably not.
But
First chapter.
Yeah, it's in many meetings. It's when Frodo and Gandalf are still conversing.
Okay.
Right, Gandalf asks Frodo about how his arm feels, and he says, "Good, it is mending fast. You will soon be sound again. Elrond has cured you. He has tended you for days, ever since you were brought in." "Days?" said Frodo. "Well, 4 nights and 3 days to be exact. The elves brought you from the ford on the night of the 20th, and that is where you lost count." And I think that this whole idea of losing count of the days, even though there's a realistic narrative reason for it, is consistent with a particular theme in Tolkien's depiction of elves. If we think back to the fall of Gondolin and to the children of Hurin, right? This tendency of elven realms to be timeless or temporally distorted, right? Right? People who enter elven spaces tend to get kind of dislocated in time. And we can see this even further, I think, with the whole idea of the Hall of Fire. I can find that. At length the feast came to an end. Elrond and Arwen rose and went down the hall, and the company followed them in due order. The doors were thrown open, and they went across a wide passage and through other doors and came into a further hall. In it were no tables, but a bright fire was burning in a great hearth between the carven pillars upon either side. Frodo found himself walking with Gandalf. "This is the Hall of Fire," said the wizard. "Here you will hear many songs and tales, if you can keep awake. But except on high days, it usually stands empty and quiet, and people come here who wish for peace and thought. There is always a fire here all the year round, but there is little other light." So the "if you can keep awake," I think, is important here. Because this notion of needing to sleep has a long historical connection to the idea of mortality. I don't know if you're familiar at all with the Epic of Gilgamesh.
A little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how familiar Tolkien was with it either, but it makes for a good kind of analog here, right? So when Gilgamesh at the end of the epic wants to make himself immortal, the guy who's actually succeeded at this tells him that he has to stay awake for 7 days and 7 nights. And Gilgamesh says, "That's easy," and immediately falls asleep, revealing the inescapable, his own inescapable mortality, right? And yeah, there's a similar kind of thing going on here, right? The elves, who will stay here and sing songs of the Blessed Realm all night, don't require sleep. But mortals who hang out in this place, people like Frodo and Bilbo, tend to get tired, tend to get sleepy here. And to thus forget themselves and where they are. And how long time has been passing. And then if we look again, like the physical descriptions of Elrond, which we didn't really get in The Hobbit either, right? We actually don't get a lot of physical descriptions of much of anyone in The Hobbit, right? The face of Elrond was ageless, neither old nor young, though in it was written the memory of many things both glad and sorrowful. His hair was dark as the shadows of twilight, and upon it was set a circlet of silver. His eyes were gray as a clear evening, and in them was a light like the light of the stars. Venerable he seemed as a king crowned with many winters, and yet hale as a tried warrior in the fullness of his strength. He was the lord of Rivendell, and mighty among both elves and men. In the middle of the table, against the woven cloths upon the wall, there was a chair under a canopy, and there sat a lady fair to look upon, and so like was she in form of womanhood to Elrond, that Frodo guessed that she was one of his close kindred. Young she was, and yet not so. The braids of her dark hair were touched by no frost. Her white arms and clear face were flawless and smooth, and the light of stars was in her bright eyes, gray as a cloudless night. Yet queenly she looked, and thought and knowledge were in her glance, as of one who has known many things that the years bring. Above her brow her head was covered with a cap of silver lace, netted with small gems, glittering white. But her soft gray raiment had no ornament save a girdle of leaves wrought in silver. So, Elrond and Arwen, in Frodo's first glimpse of them, right? Father and daughter, right? But is there enough difference between their between their apparent ages for Frodo to discern that?
No.
Yeah, just that they're close kin, right? But Elrond doesn't look any older than Arwen does, right? Yeah, the elves all look ageless. So, the purpose of these two lengthy first chapters, right? The purpose of many meetings is to set up Rivendell as a kind of timeless space. And I think that even like the title Many Meetings indicates what is to come here in the council, right? This is a place where all of the free peoples of Middle-earth, barring the Ents, who we'll get to a little later, come together, right? We have in this chapter, right, men, elves, dwarves, and hobbits. And Frodo either meets for the first time or reacquaints himself with several important members of each of these races, right? So, he at dinner, he sits beside Glowin, who was one of Bilbo's companions in The Hobbit. And of course, in the Hall of Fire, he finds Bilbo again. Not to mention being reintroduced to his own traveling companions, Aragorn and Merry, Pippin, and Sam. Now, I think I'm going to borrow a technique here, or at least a basic framework, from a scholar by the name of Michael Drought, who's one of the leading Tolkien scholars working in the U.S. And Drought, in particular, notes that a lot of his students avoid the Council of Elrond chapter and don't really delve that deeply into it. Now, Drought argues that this is a big mistake, in part because what we get here is an example of Tolkien's favorite narrative technique, this kind of indirect reportage writ large over over the course of a single chapter. But this is also where we get our sense of the geopolitics of Middle-earth, right? So the Council of Elrond actually helps to make the secondary world work by showing what's going on in different parts of the world, by having people inform each other of what's happening in their particular neck of the woods, right? Kind of like the way the references to Gondolin functioned in The Hobbits, and the references to the necromancer who was off on the edges of the story. He doesn't come into that narrative, but Gandalf has to leave to deal with him for a while. Things of that nature. So I think it's probably not a bad idea to trace out who is at the council. All right, so representing hobbits, who do we have?
You got Frodo and Bilbo, and that's really about it.
Yep, Frodo and Bilbo and Sam, but he's not really supposed to be there, right? He's kind of hanging about on the edges. For dwarves,
Glowin, Gimli.
Yep.
Glorfindel? No, wait.
Glorfindel's an elf.
That's okay.
So we can put him in the next column, right? So we have Glorfindel, Elrond, Elrond's counselor Eristor, and this is kind of here who's here for Elrond's direct household, right? These are all Rivendell elves. We also have this guy Galdor, who has come from the Grey Havens, and Legolas, who is a wood elf from Mirkwood.
Who was not in The Hobbit.
Nope. Most assuredly was not.
Right.
If he was present, was not mentioned. So we have elves here from different locations and different kindreds, right? For men, who do we have?
Boromir.
We have Boromir.
There's Aragorn who eventually shows himself.
Yep, there is Aragorn. And he reveals himself here as Isildur's heir, yes. And they are both of more or less the same kindred, right? In that they are both descended from the men of Numenor. But Boromir comes from the south, and Aragorn comes from the north, right? So they represent more or less the same kindred, but from different directional coordinates.
Yeah, Boromir comes from Gondor. Where does Aragorn come from again?
Well, just kind of the north. Right?
The north that was taken away.
Exactly. Yeah. He has been dispossessed of his kingdom, right? The kingdom of Isildur was the northern kingdom of Arnor, which no longer exists. But he is thus also the heir to the throne of Gondor, since the line of kings there had died out and were descended from Isildur's brother. So, and then for wizards, we have Gandalf. Now, what wizard should be there but isn't?
Saruman.
Yeah. Saruman is this kind of absent presence, right? And the other absent presence, given the subject of the council, is Sauron himself. And since he's discussed, I guess one could also regard Tom Bombadil as a kind of absent presence here. So what Drought usually likes to do with this is assign each student in the class a role and have them kind of play out, including the figures who are not actually present but are discussed, and have them kind of, play out, like, what does everyone here want? Like, what are they doing here? What are the stakes for everyone? We couldn't possibly do that because we only have 2 people in the class anyway, and only one is here today. So this would be a little difficult, but I think it is kind of worth at least sort of going through these different factions and figuring out what it is everybody knows, what is it they don't know, what is it that surprised them, and what is it that they want, right? What's everybody's motivation? So let's start with the hobbits here, right? What do Frodo and Bilbo want?
Well, Bilbo wants the ring for himself.
Yeah.
Frodo wants to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
To some extent.
Yeah. And indeed, even Bilbo has his moments, right, of, ooh, I want the ring back, right? But it passes. So, the hobbits, by and large, want to tell their story, right, tell their part of the story, right? And to then be out of it. Right? I think what they would really like, what they would most prefer is rest. Now, what about the dwarves? What's going on in the Lonely Mountain?
There's conflict with chapter 2.
So Glowin has two important pieces of news, right? Right. It is now many years ago, said Glowin, that a shadow of disquiet fell upon our people. Whence it came, we did not at first perceive. Words began to be whispered in secret. It was said that we were hemmed in a narrow place, and that greater wealth and splendor would be found in a wider world. Some spoke of Moria, the mighty works of our fathers that are called in our own tongue Khazad-dûm, and they declared that now at last we had the power and numbers to return. Glowin sighed. Moria, Moria, wonder of the northern world, too deep we delved there, and woke the nameless fear. Long have its vast mansions lain empty since the children of Durin fled. But now we spoke of it again with longing, and yet with dread, for no dwarf has dared to pass the doors of Khazad-dûm for many lives of kings, save Thror only, and he perished. At last, however, Balin listened to the whispers and resolved to go. And though Dain did not give leave willingly, he took with him Ori and Owen and many of our folk, and they went away south. That was nigh on 30 years ago. For a while we had news, and it seemed good. Messages reported that Moria had been entered, and a great work begun there. Then there was silence, and no word has ever come from Moria since. So, Glowin's first piece of information here, right, is...
There's something going on in Moria.
Yeah. There was a Moria colony, an effort to retake Moria, and they've lost contact with them, right? Things looked like they were going well for a little while, but now, we haven't heard for a long time, right? Then about a year ago, a messenger came to Dain, but not from Moria, from Mordor. I think the alliteration there is important too, the semantic connection here between Moria and Mordor. Now, partly this is just because in Tolkien's invented elven languages, the prefix mor means black. So Moria is black pit and Mordor is black land. Just like Turin's mother, Morwen, was black hair, yeah. A horseman in the night who called Dain to his gate. The Lord Sauron the Great, so he said, wished for our friendship. Rings he would give for it, such as he gave of old, and asked urgently concerning hobbits, of what kind they were and where they dwelt. For Sauron knows, said he, that one of these was known to you on a time. At this we were greatly troubled, and we gave no answer. And then his fell voice was lowered, and he would have sweetened it if he could. As a small token only of your friendship, Sauron asks this, he said, that you should find this thief, such was his word, and get from him, willing or no, a little ring, the least of rings that once he stole. It is but a trifle that Sauron fancies, and an earnest of your goodwill. Find it, and 3 rings that the dwarf sires possessed of old shall be returned to you, and the realm of Moria shall be yours forever. Find only news of the thief, whether he still lives and where, and you shall have great reward and lasting friendship from the Lord. Refuse, and things will not seem so well. Do you refuse? At that his breath came like the hiss of snakes, and all who stood by shuddered. But Dain said, I say neither yea nor nay. I must consider this message and what it means under its fair cloak. Consider well, but not too long, said he. The time of my thought is my own to spend, answered Dain. For the present, said he, and rode into the darkness. Heavy have the hearts of our chieftains been since that night. We needed not the fell voice of the messenger to warn us that his words held both menace and deceit, for we knew already that the power that has re-entered Mordor has not changed, and ever it betrayed us of old. Twice the messenger has returned, and has gone unanswered. The third and last time, so he says, is soon to come, before the ending of the year. And so I have been sent at last by Dain to warn Bilbo that he is sought by the enemy, and to learn, if may be, why he desires this ring, this least of rings. Also we crave the advice of Elrond, for the shadow grows and draws nearer. We discover that messengers have also come to King Brandon Dale, and that he is afraid. We fear that he may yield. Already war is gathering on his eastern borders. If we make no answer, the enemy may move men of his rule to assail King Brand and Dain also. So, the other issue here is the messenger from Mordor, right? So you've got the lost colony and the messenger from Mordor. So they want to warn Bilbo, for one thing, that he is being sought. And they want advice. Because war is looming in their part of the world. Now let's move from dwarves to men. Right? What does Boromir want?
He wants to use the ring against Sauron.
Once he's figured out what it is, right? But when the meeting starts, does he yet know what the ring is? What does he come here for? What's he doing in Rivendell in the first place?
He wasn't seeking aid.
He is seeking aid, but not the same kind the dwarves. I mean, actually kind of something similar to what the dwarves are seeking, right? The dwarves aren't seeking military aid, right? What do they want?
Advice.
They want advice, yeah. That's what you come to Rivendell for, right? You don't come to Rivendell for soldiers. You come for knowledge. And he and his brother have had this dream, right? Which he would like someone to interpret for them. All right, this rhyme goes along with it. Seek for the sword that was broken. In Imladris it dwells. There shall be counsels taken, stronger than Morgul spells. There shall be shown a token that doom is near at hand. For Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand. So, the parts of this that are unclear to him, right, are the sword that was broken, Isildur's bane, and the halfling. All right, so both of these first elements are connected in some way to Aragorn as Isildur's heir. And then the third element, of course, refers to Frodo. But yeah, he doesn't know any of this when he arrives, or he's just looking for counsel, he's looking for an interpretation of this dream. And then, once he knows what the ring is, right? He wants to know, why can't we use it? So, let's leave aside the Rivendell elves and the Grey Havens elves for a moment and talk about Legolas's news. What does Legolas come to report? Who were the elves of Mirkwood supposed to be keeping and guarding?
Gollum.
Yeah. And he has come to tell them, you know that little withered hobbit you told us to take care of? Yeah, he got away. And Gandalf provides for the others a history of the ring, proofs that demonstrate that it is the ring he says it is, right? And also evidence of Saruman's treachery. Right. This guy that we trusted, who was the most learned in ring lore of all of us, has been scheming to get it for himself. Now, one thing that Drought notes, that others as well have noted about all of this news kind of coming together and filling in the gaps in everybody's knowledge, right? There are frequent references to chance in all of this. You know, all of these, like this council wasn't summoned, right? Elrond didn't send out to various parts of Middle-earth to call all of these people together for one great council that covers all of the major humanoid races, good humanoid races, and every region of the continent. They just happened to show up at the same time. Glóin and his embassy, Legolas with his message, Boromir with the dream he needs interpreting, right? They all just happen to ride into Rivendell at the same time that Frodo and his companions arrive. Just as chance seems to have brought the ring into Bilbo's hands, and chance seems to play a role in Gandalf's notion that, that Gollum still has a part to play, right? So there are a number of scholars who argue that this actually kind of shows evidence of the Christian underpinnings of Tolkien's thought process and of Tolkien's world building in general, and that this notion of chance is very closely connected to the concept of divine providence. Now, how familiar are you with the notion of divine providence in Christian theology?
It's sort of like fate, right? Like
sort of.
The events were put together in a way that all of it will happen in a certain amount of time, and that it will cause this outcome.
Yeah, it's sort of. It's actually kind of more of a compromise position between free will and fatalism, right? So the notion of divine providence suggests that there is a kind of cosmic order that works for good in the universe. Right? Have you ever heard the phrase like the best of all possible worlds?
Something like that.
Yeah, it comes from the work of a German philosopher in the 18th century by the name of Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz, which is a fantastic name. And, you should see pictures of the guy. He also had a fantastic wig. But yeah, Leibniz argued that everything was rationally ordered by God, and that the fact that evil existed was that evil existed because it was impossible. It wasn't possible even for God to build a perfect world, right? So what we had was the best of all possible worlds in which everything is still ordered for the good. However, human beings come in and muck it up, right? Because we are given free will. Right? No one is compelled to act by providence. You still have a choice as to what you're going to do, or whether you're going to do it or not, right? So while everything has been kind of set up and ordered for Frodo to come and take the ring and go off on the quest, right? It's still a surprise to everyone when he says that he will do this thing while they're all bickering. Because there's no command laid on him to do so, right? In fact, I think there's a point in chapter 2 where Gandalf is trying to comfort Frodo and explain things to him. Frodo says something about that he wishes that this hadn't happened in his time. And okay, page 60 in my edition, so I realize that means nothing. It's like, I do really wish to destroy it, cried Frodo, or well, to have it destroyed. I am not made for perilous quests. I wish I had never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen? Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf. You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, not for power or wisdom at any rate, but you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and heart and wits as you have. But I have so little of any of these things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take them? And so, the idea here is that Frodo does still have a choice as to what he will do. And he has to come around to making up his own mind as to what specifically he's going to do about this, right? It's his decision to leave the Shire and not tell people. Gandalf approves of this decision, but he doesn't make it for him. Now, Providence seems to want all of this to happen. Providence seems to have gathered all of these figures together in this one place. I still don't know Providence is a Christian idea, but there are other rationalist philosophies that don't have a direct sort of Christian implication that work in similar ways, right? So I feel I still feel like this is a work by a Christian author that may contain some Christian themes, but is not itself a Christian text. But I do think it's probably worth it if we think about what Saruman and Sauron, and even Tom Bombadil, might say on their own part were they present at the council. What do you think Saruman would say to the others?
Saruman's been focused on getting the ring for himself.
Yeah.
He would probably want to go on this fellowship that they've sort of come together to decide on. Saruman.
Well, let's assume that let's assume that he deals honestly with the others, or at least as honestly as he can.
Okay.
And that he admits to them that yes, he wants the ring. What do you think? How do you think he would explain himself?
It would probably try to explain how he would be capable of taking power, or being able to destroy the dark power by himself if he had the ring.
Yeah. Not too far off from what Boromir would probably argue, right? Although Boromir is thinking specifically in military terms, right? That Saruman, right, is a wizard and a lore master, and probably sees himself as wise enough to master it, right? And to turn it to good purpose. In fact, he says something almost to that effect when he offers Gandalf a place as his helper, right? He says, I have not brought you hither to be instructed by you, but to give you a choice. He drew himself up then and began to declaim, as if he were making a speech long rehearsed. The elder days are gone, the middle days are passing, the younger days are beginning. The time of the elves is over, but our time is at hand, the world of men which we must rule. But we must have power to order all things as we will, for that good which only the wise can see. And listen, Gandalf, my old friend and helper, he said, coming near and speaking now in a softer voice. I said we, for we it may be if you will join with me. A new power is rising. Against it the old allies and policies will not avail us at all. There is no hope left, and elves are dying Numenor. This then is one choice before you, before us. We may join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. Its victory is at hand, and there will be rich reward for those that aided it. As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow, and the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its courses to control it. We can bide our time, we can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring maybe evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose, knowledge, rule, order. All the things that we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There would not be, any real change in our designs, only our means. So I think knowledge, rule, order are pretty important elements of this, right? Essentially, joining with Sauron, Saruman seems to be arguing, would sweep away the chaos and infighting and bickering that have plagued these so-called free peoples from time immemorial, and would allow wise and intelligent leaders like himself and Gandalf to better direct development, really, right? They could build a new and different world, right? There's a point at which Gandalf says that Saruman has a mind of metal and wheels, right? And we'll come to see that Saruman is associated with industrialism in particular, and with modernity and modernization. And, there are a couple of things about which he's right in his speech, right? That, the elves are fading. In fact, the elves probably have the least stake in this of anyone, right? There are a couple of holdouts, but most of them have gone back across the sea to the Undying Lands. And indeed, most of these others will at the end of the trilogy. So, they're not holding out much. They don't have much stake in the fight overall. And, men, at least, the high men of Numenor aren't in such a great position either. Gondor is besieged. The kingdom in the north is destroyed. And, the heir to the throne is a ragged wanderer who lives in the wilderness, right? So, at least from a certain standpoint, a lot of what Saruman says makes sense. The problem here is this notion that it's okay to impose knowledge, rule, and order on other people by force, right? Which is what joining with the Dark Power would entail. Now, just for an interesting little thought experiment here, what might Sauron say in his own defense at this council? It's hard to inhabit that position, right? In part because he's the most important character, arguably, in the entire series, and yet we never see him, right? He constantly remains kind of at the edges of it. How did he lose his ring in the first place?
It was cut off by Isildur.
Yeah. Elves and men formed an alliance and made war on him, cut the ring off of his finger and took it. He's been looking for it all these long years, right? He made it. It's his by right. What right have they to keep it from him? All of this unpleasantness would cease if they just gave him what he asked for. Now, granted, that would also breed a kind of new unpleasantness, right? It's not like he would be suddenly become kind and forgiving if he was given the ring, right? But I think it is sort of like kind of interesting to note here what this might look like from the villain's perspective, right? That, here's a group of bandits, thieves, and outlaws who've stolen from him, right? A perspective not unlike Gollum's, who consistently refers to Baggins as thief, right? Indeed, Sauron's messenger also refers to Bilbo as thief, right? When he comes to the Lonely Mountain to deliver his message to Dain. But the basic point here, right, again, like the reason why this chapter is so important is that it gives us this understanding of the bigger picture of Middle-earth politics, right? Even like in all of these places that don't enter directly into this story, right? Like, the Lonely Mountain and Dale are barely mentioned here. It also sets us up for what's happening in Rohan, which we'll deal with in the Two Towers. gives us some background on what's been going on in Boromir's city of Minas Tirith, and reveals to Boromir, whose father rules in the absence of a king, that the heir to the throne is alive and well and present, right? So this is a putting all of the pieces together chapter. Now, we've used a lot of time on this, but I do also want to talk about the journey through Moria.
No worries about Bombadil?
What's that?
We didn't do Bombadil.
You're right, we didn't. Yeah. So yeah, in fact, what do some of the elves even suggest doing with the ring?
Just giving it to Bombadil.
Yeah, why not just give it to Bombadil? Which Gandalf, the notion Gandalf disabuses them of, right? Like one, it's not like he's powerful enough to hold Sauron off, or like he is master of himself, but not of anyone else, or anything else, as we noted. And he'd probably just forget about it, because such things have no hold on his mind. Like, so that whole thing about being the master, right, having self-mastery, actually ends up being a detriment here.
Because he can do whatever he wants to at any given time, and it doesn't matter to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because this thing has no power over him, it also means it doesn't matter to him. And because it doesn't matter to him, he's just as likely to lose it as to keep it safe. Right, the kind of, the way we tend to, misplace small objects that we don't really give a shit about. Now, granted, some of us have a tendency to also misplace small objects that we really, really do need and care about, like our keys and things like that, But yeah, you get the idea, right? Basically, because the ring doesn't mean anything to him, he wouldn't understand the importance of keeping it in a safe place. And then Bombadil is, for all intents and purposes, out of the saga. They bring him up, they talk about him. They even provide something like a history for him. But nah. Let's move on. I think we'll do a little bit more with the Moria stuff next time, because we're at about 4:30, and I want to be able to actually spend some time with it. I am glad that we spent so much time on the Council of Elrond stuff, because it does matter, but
They clear up a good bit.
yeah. Well, and that's the point. Like, I think when I was reading Drought's article, he was talking about how he'd been interviewed on NPR when the movies came out, and there was a bookseller who was being interviewed on the same show, who said that he always advised people to just skip the Council of Elrond chapter because it's long and it's boring and it will interfere with your enjoyment. And then, Drought is sitting there horrified. But then how the hell do you understand what's happening in the rest of the book? It's a lot of exposition, but it's really important exposition. So the point that I want to make about what's happening in Moria is that Tolkien is actually operating here in a classical epic tradition to an extent. What we have in Moria is an example of what the Greeks called katabasis. And a katabasis is literally a journey through the underworld. So the classic examples are in the Odyssey and the Aeneid. Tolkien's version is probably closer to what's in the Aeneid because Aeneas actually physically travels through the underworld. And in fact, there's a kind of interesting connection too, in that Aeneas enters the underworld through a cave near a lake. The lake is called Avernus, which in Greek means no birds, because the lake itself is poisonous and birds that fly over it die. I think the Lake of the Watcher in the Water is actually kind of similar to the Lake Avernus of the Aeneid. And again, Odysseus doesn't really physically journey through the underworld either, right? He goes to an island, digs a pit, sacrifices a ram, and then a bunch of spirits come to him. Now, one thing that both of them are doing in their respective epics, though, is looking for information, right? They go to the underworld to learn something important about the future. So that's what I'd kind of like to leave it on today, is like, just let's think about like what exactly is the necessary piece of knowledge that Frodo and the other members of the Fellowship take with them from their journey to Moria, right? What is the thing that was there that they needed to learn?
I'd say probably the Balrog. Or, well, King Balin's dead, but that's not as important.
Yeah.
The Balrog is there, which means that either a remnant of Melkor's forces survived and lived in Moria for thousands of years, or Sauron is creating Balrogs.
Well, we actually know where the Balrog came from. Glowin, in his narrative, mentions, they delved too greedily and too deep, right? And woke it up. So this is something from the Elder Days that they have brought back to the surface, right? But, they left Moria initially because of this thing, and then figured, maybe it's calmed down, we'll go back. And I think that Balin's death is also a particularly important piece of knowledge. But I think that what we probably want to try to do, and we'll save this for next time, right? We'll stop it here, because we are coming up on time anyway. What do these things have in common with each other? We'll just kind of leave that as something to ponder. Okay, so let me give you the guide questions for next time. And then you are free to go.